Hello there, thanks for joining me for another Pondering in a Psalm. One of the things that has struck me as I've been working through the Psalms over these past months is how far from some sort of random collection and arrangement they are. Sometimes the Psalms are clearly, intentionally placed next to each other or in a particular group, perhaps, because of links between them. And that certainly seems to be why Psalms 87, which we're looking at in this study, follows immediately after Psalm 86. We didn't really mention it in our look at Psalm 86, but in verse 9 of that psalm, David prophesies that people from all the nations of the world will bring their worship to God. This is what he says: "All the nations you have made shall come and worship before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name." And now Psalm 87 develops this in words penned by the sons of Korah. Look at verses 4 to 6 in particular, which we'll come to in just a moment. Now, Psalm 87 is also the psalm that was clearly in the mind of the slave trader turned hymn writer John Newton when he wrote that great hymn, "Glorious Things of Thee Are Spoken," a direct quote from verse 3 of this psalm. And that's the focus of the whole psalm. In fact, I would encourage you to read Newton's hymn almost as a sort of commentary on this psalm and praise God yourself. So in verses 1 to 3 of this psalm, we have a glorious place. Zion is the epicenter of the worship of God, established and founded by God, which is why the psalmist speaks of it as being chosen and secure. God takes a special delight and joy in the place he established as the place where he would present himself among the people of Israel. But John Newton was not the first to see Zion as a picture of the New Testament church and even the New Jerusalem in eternity. Isaiah, among others, did that. And the writer of the Hebrews moves us from Old Testament to New Testament blessings and beyond when he says in 12:22, "You have come to Mount Zion and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem." And do you know something? What was gloriously true of Zion of old is so much more true of the church of today, isn't it? I wonder whether you think of your local church, your local body of believers, with that same deep affection and thanksgiving as Korah's descendants did of Jerusalem of old, because you should do. Then in verses 4 to 6, we have a glorious people. What a wonderful picture this is of fulfilled prophecy as the Gentile nations of the world, some of them traditional enemies of God's people, flock to Jerusalem to worship the true and living God. 4 nations are mentioned, but they are surely representative of the nations of the world. You have here Rahab, which is another name for Egypt, southwest of Jerusalem. You have Philistia, over to the west. You have Tyre further north from Galilee, and then Cush, which is the region of Ethiopia in the far south from Jerusalem. And all these people, notice in verse 4, come to know God. And in the Bible, that means so much more than intellectual awareness. It speaks of intimacy, of a saving relationship. And then we read also in verse 4 that people from these nations are, quote, born there, which is an Old Testament way in the context of saying they were born again. And then in verse 6, we read that the Lord registers the people. And if that's not their names being entered into the Lamb's Book of Life, I don't know what is. What a wonderful picture of universal salvation in that sense. And then in verse 7, we have a glorious praise. What happens when men and women from every nation, tribe, people and language gather together in Mount Zion? Well, they praise and they worship and they acknowledge that every spiritual blessing they have emanates from the presence of God. Friends, this is one of those scenarios painted for us in the Bible which is meant to lift our spirits and whet our appetites for glory when these prophetic images will be reality. And I can tell you that just briefly reflecting on this psalm has done my heart no end of good. Our local churches, our gatherings now should be small foretastes of this glory divine in the future, and we should devote ourselves to them with all our heart and strength. But believe me, the best is yet to come. The Lord bless you and the Lord keep you.